Shabbat Shalom and Happy Hanukkah.
Shabbat Shalom.
The traditional readings for this Shabbat are numerous. In fact, this Shabbat is the reason why every traditional synagogue aspires to have at least 3 Torah scrolls. So they can have 3 Torah scrolls, each pre-rolled to the proper place for the 3 Torah readings prescribed for this day. It doesn't happen every year, but when you have Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, Hanukkah, and it's Rosh Chodesh, it will be the beginning of the month of Tevet. When you have that, we have the Torah reading for Shabbat, which is Parshat Miketz, the middle of the story of Joseph. And then you have the Torah reading for Hanukkah, which is in the book of Numbers. There is an account in the book of Numbers about the dedication of the tabernacle. And over the course of 12 days, each of the 12 tribes brings an offering as part of the dedication of the tabernacle. So each day of Hanukkah, one of the first 8 days is read to mark each day of Hanukkah. And then the reading for Rosh Chodesh, which is a description of the Rosh Chodesh sacrifice. So in order not to have to roll the Torah during the middle of the service, 3 Torahs are taken out in the Saturday morning service. And then if you add to that the recitation of the full Hallel, which is also done in tomorrow's Saturday morning service, tomorrow's Saturday morning service is the longest service of the entire year outside of the high holidays. The only time 3 Torahs are taken out to read from doesn't happen every year, but when it does, you want 3. Additionally, there is the Haftorah for the Shabbat in Hanukkah, which is filled with meaning. Not that the other stuff isn't as well, but the Haftorah is filled with particular meaning about Hanukkah. Historically, Hanukkah celebrates the time in the year 165 BCE when a group of Jews led by Judah Maccabee successfully battled the Seleucid Greeks to retake the temple in Jerusalem and regain the right to practice Judaism. But the central Hanukkah story is not about the fighting. Accounts of the fighting are recorded in the various books of Maccabees, but the Jewish people did not preserve the books of Maccabees. 2 of the books of Maccabees are actually in the Catholic Bible, but these books are not even recognized by Jewish tradition. We didn't continue to hold on to them. We didn't continue copying them over. So they weren't preserved in Hebrew, although parts of them, some of them were found in the past century and a half, especially in the Cairo Geniza. Within our tradition, it seems pretty clear that a move was made not to glorify the battles of the Maccabees per se, but to glorify the power of the Spirit which made those victories possible. The emphasis is placed upon the light, the eternal light which represents the presence of God in the midst of the people. In fact, the Haftorah begins with the exclamation, "Shout for joy, fair Zion, for lo, I come to dwell in your midst." I come to dwell in your midst. Shechanti b'tochech, says the Lord. Shechanti b'tochech. It's taken to be a reference to the Shekhinah, the presence of God, represented by the light. Rabbinic tradition refocuses the holiday to commemorate the rededication of the temple following the battle. In fact, the word Hanukkah means dedication. The inside of the temple was illuminated with a menorah, a candelabra with 7 branches. The light symbolized the ongoing presence of God, just as our eternal light does. It's the Talmud, not any of the books of the Maccabees, that recounts the story when the Maccabees searched for olive oil, for burning in the menorah, that they could only find enough oil to last for one day. Yet when they lit the lamp anyway, by some miracle, the oil burned for 8 days until new oil could be acquired. This was taken to mean that the ongoing light of God's presence continued to be with them. Now, from a rationalist perspective, I can actually understand if someone is tempted to dismiss the story as fiction. I can clearly recall as a child sort of wincing inside as I described the story to non-Jewish friends of mine. I had a hard time, even then, taking it seriously. But that was because I was taking it literally. The truth is that religious stories are not necessarily about precise historical events. How things have happened is not nearly as important as how they are told. Many things happened in history, many things happened in biblical history that never made it into the Torah. And many stories are told in the Torah that didn't necessarily have to have happened the way they're told. But the way they are told, that is when the events or the story gets power. And that is when the story begins to affect who we are. The stories are a way of conveying a teaching. And in this case, the story conveys a teaching about the power of the Spirit, not the power of the Maccabees, but the power of the Spirit, and how the power of the Spirit is even more powerful than the power of military force. The lesson is expressed precisely at the end of the Haftorah for Shabbat in Hanukkah, keeping in mind that the rabbis of the Talmud, of that tradition, it's the rabbis of our tradition who select each Haftorah for the reading of the moment. So there's a reason that Haftorah is chosen. And the Haftorah for the Shabbat and Hanukkah describes how the prophet Zechariah has a vision of a menorah. And he asks, what does it mean? And the angel in his vision, and the angel in Zechariah's vision answers, do you not know what it means? And Zechariah says, no, I don't know what it means. And the angel says, Lo v'chayil v'lo v'choach ki im beruchi amar Adonai Tzavaot. Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. If you want any clearer rabbinic statement about how this holiday is not about the Maccabees, but about some power of the Spirit as represented by the light in place, representing the presence of God, just look at the fact that the rabbis chose that to be read on the Shabbat in Hanukkah. Hanukkah is about the power of the Spirit. Hanukkah addresses the power of the Spirit in all its rituals, narratives, and symbolism. The Maccabees were fighting to hold on to their way of life. One story, and it's the power of the Spirit that allows them to do that. One story behind the Dreidel, another symbol of Hanukkah, one story behind the Dreidel is that it is a gambling toy used precisely to hide our houses of study in plain sight. At a time when we were prohibited from studying Torah or Talmud, and it happened in many times in the course of our history that we've been prohibited from studying Torah. At a time when we were prohibited from studying Torah, we might gather to study our texts, but at any moment, if authorities were to come to check up, the story is we'd be able to hide the books away and pull out our dreidels, and this is a gambling hall. What are you talking about? At any moment, we need to convince those passing authorities that we were gambling rather than studying. That is a story of spiritual resistance. I see these themes also resonating in the Torah reading for this Shabbat. And really, this is the Torah reading on Shabbat every Hanukkah. Shabbat every Hanukkah, we're reading Parshat Miketz. It's the story of Joseph. When we read about Joseph in the Torah, we are reading one of the few accounts of someone being a lone, isolated Jewish individual negotiating the power structure of a larger nation in the diaspora. The significance for us in our setting is that in most of our lives, we do not interact with the world around us as a community dealing with other communities. We interact with the world around us as Jewish individuals in a non-Jewish society dealing with other individuals, mostly non-Jewish individuals. And although we as a people have been scattered for 2,000 years, it's a very different condition when we are scattered communities or scattered individuals. We are in our situation scattered as individuals. So we have this in common with Joseph. Joseph is striving to be himself in a difficult and confusing situation, and often so are we. On one level, Hanukkah is about the freedom to be Jewish and the strength we need as individuals in a larger non-Jewish society to uphold that freedom. We light our menorahs and put them in the window to be seen by the outside world, to celebrate that we can actually do so. We take a stand for who we are, and that stand, more than anything, is a symbol of an internal statement that we have the confidence to do so. Even more than it is addressed to others, who these days are not likely to see candles burning in windows when electric lights are attached to so many houses outside. It overtakes these small candles in the window. But this message is a real sign to us of our own internal strength, or the power of the Spirit that comes through us. And that message comes at precisely the time on the American calendar when we need it most. At the time when the entire secular society is again reabsorbed into the dominant religious culture and we are most excluded. These days, the exclusion is passive rather than active. No laws have been created recently here to keep us locked up in some ghetto somewhere or to exclude us from social or economic activity. But the secular world where we are, the secular world where we can more fully participate in larger society while still being Jews, suddenly narrows as the entire society focuses on being something foreign to us. The larger society then acts passively to restrict our fuller participation, even when actively it is not making an effort to do so. In addition, in very recent years, we have had to deal with the clear resurgence of unofficial anti-Semitism, that is anti-Semitism that is not state-sponsored, but is real and violent nonetheless. It is precisely at such moments that celebrations like Hanukkah become even more important as a source of strength for being fully ourselves as a cultural and religious minority in a larger society. But Hanukkah is about much more than freedom in a negative sense, that is, the freedom to be left alone. This holiday has many joyous meanings, including the celebration of religious freedom. But what all the meanings of Hanukkah have in common is the ability of a small group or a small effort to make a big difference. Small efforts, especially if done with great dedication, which is the meaning of the word Hanukkah, can inspire big things. One candle can dispel all the darkness around it. A small, weak people can overcome far greater strength. The human spirit can overcome great adversity. A small amount of oil can burn much longer than would be expected. The Jewish people can last much longer than anyone would think reasonable, and the light of Torah can continue to burn, to glow from it. There is great hope in the Hanukkah message that we can overcome great challenges, that we can find within ourselves and each other the hope and the strength to see our way through our most difficult times. And so there is great wonder, power, and holiness and truth in the story of the oil. Together, let us ensure and be assured that the light of the holiday will carry us forward stronger and more joyful than ever. Shabbat Shalom and happy Hanukkah.